Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this edition of Insight. Well, it's raining investments in the country. Looks like Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Make in India campaign has won some early backers. Japan has committed $34 billion of infrastructure and manufacturing investment over the next 5 years. Beijing could pledge another $100 billion over a similar time frame. Assume that the US, Britain and Germany comes up with another $100 billion of investment proposals, and the Indian economy may have to soak up about 12% of last year's GDP in overseas capital in the next 5 years. But what kind of challenge will it pose to a country that has never dealt with foreign direct investment of this magnitude on a sustained basis, as the FDI won't come alone but will be followed by potentially destabilizing foreign financial capital? We discuss this issue in today's edition of Insight. Okay, so we are going to talk about the investment scenario, of course, and to discuss more on this, I'm joined by Mr. KG Narendranath. He's the Deputy Editor with Financial Express. Mr. Sunil Sinha, who is the Director with India Ratings and Research. Also Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, who's associated with the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and Dr. Rakesh Mohan Joshi. He's a professor with Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. Welcome to the program, all of you. Let's start the discussion with you, Dr. Joshi, since this is to do with, of course, in light of the fact that Japan has committed a good amount of investment in India. The Chinese president is already here in the country. It is expected that China may also promise a huge amount of investment. But what does it look like from the Indian economy's perspective? Is it a very happy news?
No, there is no denying the fact that India needs investment for this thing. But what is extremely important here is the investment is basically coming in the infrastructural sector. If you see the $100 billion of investment, I think half of them is coming for the development of the industrial parks and half of them for the infrastructure, railway and all those things. So what is extremely important in this investment is we need investment especially for infrastructure. So segment targeted for this investment appears to be extremely attractive. But the same thing is about the Japanese investment. Basically, they invest in the high-speed trains and the infrastructure in which we need investment. We also need basically, not only the investment, what the Prime Minister was talking about, the Made in India capability. So to make that capability, the infrastructural investment is basically a must rather than, a small here and there measures to promote export from this country. Today, if you see, China is the largest trader on the earth in the world. China's share in the world export is almost 12.5%. It is the highest. And the other problem with India is, we need the Chinese investment. We are having, trade deficit kind of a thing with China, almost 36 billion US dollars. Anyway, all countries in the world have a trade deficit with China. So for that also, I think if this investment comes and then, we have that capacity to manufacture and then if we export, so I think it will help us in bringing down the trade deficit also.
Is it a very, very worrying factor? You talked about the trade imbalances that we share with other countries. Here we are sitting on reserves, still importing it. There have been different instances when the trade policy itself of the country has been criticized, and there has been calls of reviewing that policy in terms of depending on the commodities, depending on the things that we include in the trade basket. What is your view on this?
If you see the export-import, especially the composition of export and import between India and China, basically we export them iron ore. Iron ore, China accounts for almost 76-78% of India's total export of iron ore. So we export them basically the raw materials, which they process. And they do the value addition and then they export. What we import from China, we import the manufacturing goods, all sorts of consumer electronics, consumer goods, almost everything which is value added, we import from there. So I think it makes a sense that, Chinese companies or any company start manufacturing in India. So India get the benefit of that value addition. And what I think the Prime Minister has talked last time is, the made in India of a very high quality. So this is China. This is more in interest of China than India FDI. China slowly becoming a more cost. The cost of manufacturing is going up. So China is not that cost effective what it was 10 years before. India is still very cost effective, and I think every time to pat our back is not the right way, because if you see 1980, our per capita income in terms of PPP was much more than China. Till 19, our per capita income was more than China. It was only after liberalization started in India that Chinese per capita income has gone to 3 to 4 times than India's per capita income. So I think there is certainly a case for retrospect for this. But if you see that, there is no denying the fact that investment in this country is needed, irrespective of the government. All governments have tried to attract investment, but at the same time, Chinese investment, our experience in Africa shows, which I think very frequently I travel to several, over a dozen countries in Africa. When Chinese investment comes, they come as a turnkey project. And Chinese bring right from the mechanics and the labors right from China in aircraft loads. So I think this is very peculiar to Chinese investment, unlike India's investment. China, if you see the China's outward FDI, it is basically 95-98% it is the government companies or the public sector undertakings. In India, India's investment is not the government investment, it is the private sector. And therefore the private sector investment, India's investment outside is not because of the government, but probably despite of the government. Our entire focus is to promote inward FDI rather than the outward FDI. So if you ask, all surveys that tell about Africa or other developing countries, the Chinese investment, people have to be cautious, and people are not very, very positive on a long-term basis with the Chinese investment. And
so the sentiment that one would share towards Japan or their investment would be different from what the Chinese investment.
It's very different, but at the same time, I think the Chinese investment or any investment is welcome. It depends upon us, how I think we are geared up for this amount of investment, how we protect our economy. Like if you see the pharmaceutical product, India is the largest exporter of the APIs, the generic drugs in the market. If you see the Chinese generic drugs in the Indian market, they are extremely cheap. Now, if Chinese are manufacturing those medicines in India, the Indian small scale industry, these people are extremely worried. Ceramics, we are getting most of the ceramics from China. Our Chinese manufacturers are extremely worried if Chinese starts, because Chinese pricing, I think a lot of research has gone, but we find across the world when we talk the people, it's a mystery how they are in a position to produce that low cost product. So their cost of production, their competitiveness in that cost of production is something that I think our industry need to be geared up.
But then this majorly these investments that are going to come from these countries, the deals that have been signed are in order to ensure that the smart city concept of this government also kicks up, and that's where you see the roads, the corridors, the cities being made on those lines, modernizing the cities. Do you think that's a fair way of going about it? Maybe it might just, as you said, that the promise is for $100 billion. It may be just less than that. But then keeping in mind that we are in totality also addressing issues like job creation, we are looking at better cities, we are going to give more employment, also leading to more opportunities.
Better technology.
Is it a wise way of going about it?
No, I think despite all the shortcomings of the FDI coming from any other country, especially China, for which we are so cautious, but I think the way the Prime Minister is talking about the concept of, you talked of the smart cities, infrastructure, logistics, I think it looks very logical. The government seems to be very focused in terms of its FDI, because when I talk to the exporters, manufacturers at various forums, what we feel is any minute changes in the export-import policy, giving them 3% exempt scrip or any other these small things are not going to help them in a long-term or a sustainable basis. It's very short-term. Something which is going to help our exporters and the manufacturers on a long-term basis is, giving them a world-class infrastructure, and an infrastructure which is compared to other parts of the world and the regulatory environment, so that they compete in the world. India also came up with the concept of SEZ. China came with concept of SEZ. But if you compare the Chinese concept of SEZ and India, I think it's very different. At 10 hectare land, you give an SEZ to a building. You know, where an IT exporter becomes an SEZ. In China, if you talk of the Guangdong and the SEZ, so you know, it's 50,000 acres of the land and it's a complete city, and therefore the concept of a smart cities is perfect. The cost of logistics. If you export a product in the international market, you know, the cost of logistics is around, you know, anywhere between 30% to 60-70%. Your product becomes incompetitive only by the logistics. You know, you talk of international logistics, even if you talk of the domestic logistics, if you transport anything from this place to outskirts of Delhi or Mumbai,
that's right.
You know, it's time consuming.
Yeah.
And therefore, you know, you forget about transporting the product, but if people you have to transport from this place to outskirts of any metropolitan, it takes 2 hours, wherein the whole, you know, journey is less than 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So this is which is making our economy incompetitive, our people incompetitive, and our, you know, the manufacturing incompetitive. And therefore, I think although it will take a much longer time to give the result, but China, the basic difference is China's logistics. You are aware of, you know, in 1947, India's share in the world market was 2.5%. China's share was only 9%. China's share in the world market today is 12.5%. China is the largest exporter on the earth. Where are we? 1.9%. And so I think, and what is the basic difference? China. The basic difference in China now is their logistics. And even if you talk after India's liberalization, 1990 we talk of, I think the China's entire progress after 1990 that they managed is remarkable.
Yeah.
And same thing is the regulatory framework is more remarkable than ours, wherein the foreign companies could come and they could operate.
Yeah.
In India, the foreign companies, their operation is...
Again, there are problems because, you know, it comes to the structural defects that we have.
But I think the focus of the government is I think perfectly, you know, commendable.